For the latest political developments from Kenya, we are joined live via Skype from Nairobi by my colleague Vincent Makori, the managing editor of VOA's Africa 54 television news program. Good evening, Vincent.
Good evening, Shaka.
How are you?
Well, I'm doing well in this very interesting times in Nairobi.
Talk to us about the mood from your vantage point.
In fact, at this point in time, we can say the mood is tense. There's a state of confusion. The day, 26th of October, Thursday, tomorrow, looks like one of those days you wish could come so fast and just pass, but it has been dragging on. It's like time is moving in slow motion. Everything has come to a standstill, and most people are in a state of confusion, uncertainty, and fear. Nobody knows whether Thursday will be a peaceful day or will be the beginning of total chaos, in as much as the leader of the opposition, the main opposition, NASA, which now has transformed itself into a national resistance movement, has called on his supporters not to demonstrate, but rather to stay home, stay away from the polling stations and just pray. But still, even with those assurances, there are concerns about what could possibly happen tomorrow. And many fear anything could go wrong.
When you talk about the mood being tense, are we talking about a sort of mood or air that you could imagine cutting through with a knife?
I'm telling you, it is literally something almost tangible. You can see it in the air, you can feel it, you can see in the faces of people. You listen to all conversations on the streets, in the restaurants, everywhere. Everybody is asking the same question: what will our country look like tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, even more significantly? Of course, there are those real diehard supporters of the ruling Jubilee coalition. They have no fear. They know exactly what's going to happen, that their presidential candidate is going to win the election. But there's a big population of this country right now that is wondering whether after tomorrow they will continue feeling like they're truly members of this nation, because they are being left out, and they're seriously feeling like this kind of election leaves a country more divided than what is desired, a more united country.
Now, when you talk about, again, Raila Odinga transforming NASA into a sort of resistance movement, really, are we talking about something similar to across the border, the national resistance movement in Uganda?
In fact, that is what it sounds like. Of course, we know that the national resistance movement also had, initially was National Resistance Army. Mr. Raila Odinga did not make any kind of, he did not allude to a possibility of going the military way, but definitely he, by calling his political coalition now a movement of resistance, he made it very clear that what he sees ahead of us is not a normal democratic government, but a system, a regime that needs to be resisted by all means, that needs to be brought to its knees. And he did spell out some of the things that he's planning to do in order first to force an election within the next 90 days, because as far as he's concerned, tomorrow is a charade, is a farce. Tomorrow is not going to happen according to him. So whatever takes place tomorrow is completely irrelevant, immaterial as far as Mr. Odinga is concerned. So in his tone, you get the sense that he feels like democracy has been suspended in this country. The Constitution is in jeopardy. Institutions are completely endangered, and that now is the time for him and those who have the same mind as him to start a movement of resisting what he sees as an emerging repressive regime.
You know, as I talk to many Kenyans, I got the sense that perhaps one of the few remaining permanent institutions that commanded respect really across the board was the judiciary system. What about the fact that the Kenyan Supreme Court, under the able leadership of Chief Justice David Maraga, was unable to hold a quorum, to mobilize a quorum? Was this an accident, a coincidence, Or is it possible that, in fact, there could have been an invisible hand that, in a sense, aims at undermining that particular institution?
It is not lost on anybody's memory that soon after the Supreme Court ruled that the elections have been annulled, there was a very clear, very overt threat against the Supreme Court. We, of course, heard words like it will get fixed. Now, because of those kind of pronouncements, some are reading a lot into this lack of quorum today. The president of the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, yesterday certified this case as a matter of urgency and called on all the justices of the Supreme Court to come to work so they can do their duty, which comes once in a while. Remember, the Supreme Court is not sitting every day to adjudicate cases. This is one of the few times in the life of the Supreme Court that the judges are called upon to perform this national duty. Now, how is it that the justices fail to turn up? And knowing the politics that surround this, many are actually wondering whether there wasn't some invisible hand behind, whether, in fact, it is not an act of kind of sabotage. In fact, does appear almost like, considering that the president of the Supreme Court himself showed up, some would see this as insubordination from the other justices. Now, the question is this a precedent? Is this how perhaps the Supreme Court will systematically get undermined and perhaps eventually become a weaker institution through a process of sabotage among just those, the same justices that are supposed to be the symbol of independence and, in fact, the hope for most of Kenyans who look up to this new constitution.
Final question. What about the fact that the High Court earlier today ruled that the 291 returning officers were apparently appointed illegally? Does that mean that tomorrow's election is an election, or does that in fact become perhaps a selection?
If we take the words of the chairman of the IBC, Mr. Wafula Chebukati, he says that although, that was the ruling of the High Court, it's still those officials are still able to conduct their business, and they should be considered legal because he says the reason why the High Court said that is because some of the names had not been submitted to the relevant parties in advance. And therefore, although the appointment is not illegal in some respects, the Supreme Court, the High Court, ruled that way, but allowed them to continue with their work. That is what the chairman says. So as far as we are concerned, there could be questioned after the election. There could be someone going back to court and saying the returning officers were not duly and legally appointed, and therefore the results they submit could be considered null and void. So you can expect some court cases after Thursday, October 26th.
Well, in that case, my friend, I have to say, frankly, that thank you so much for your insight, and take care of yourself.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You're most welcome.